They say an Omega can smell lies the way a wolf smells blood. It's in the way the air thickens, how truth and deception leave different textures on your tongue. I tasted Victor's lie the moment it left his lips, and it was going to kill me. Chapter 1. The Mist Rises. The dawn air tasted of iron and ice. I could smell my own blood where the chains had cut into my wrists, could feel the rough stone of the execution platform beneath my knees. Around me, the Black Claw pack gathered in their ceremonial circle, torches flickering like hungry eyes in the pre-dawn darkness. This was how they wanted it: public, ritualistic, a lesson carved in flesh and fear. Dax, the head executioner, read the condemnation in that flat, emotionless tone they reserved for the already dead. Ash of no lineage, Omega of the lowest order, you are condemned for the crime of false witness against the air. You have sown discord with lies, challenged the authority of the Alpha's blood, and brought shame upon the pack that fed you. I barely heard the words. They'd stopped mattering 2 days ago when Alpha Ragnar looked me in the eye and chose his son over truth. I didn't regret speaking. I regretted that no one believed me. Victor had murdered the Greymane emissary in cold blood during what should have been a peace negotiation, and I'd watched it happen from the shadows where Omegas are expected to remain. I'd thought truth mattered more than rank. I'd been catastrophically wrong. Soren, the second executioner, moved into position behind me. I could sense his discomfort. My truth sense had always been acute, could taste emotions the way other wolves tasted prey on the wind. He didn't want to do this. But he would. Orders were orders, and Omegas were expendable. The ceremonial blade whispered as it left its sheath. Then I felt them. Dozens of emotional signatures bleeding through the morning mist like warmth through winter frost. Not the chaotic jumble of a mob, but something disciplined, coordinated. A single unified purpose that made the air vibrate with contained power. My truth sense had never felt anything like it. It was like hearing a symphony after a lifetime of single notes. The mist thickened impossibly fast, rolling across the execution ground in waves that had nothing to do with weather. Dax hesitated, blade raised. Soren took a step back. The pack stirred uneasy. Alpha Ragnar rose from his seat of judgment, his massive frame tense. They emerged from the white void like ghosts gaining substance. 50 wolves, moving in perfect formation, surrounding the execution ground with a precision that spoke of countless drills and absolute trust. They made no sound. They didn't need to. Their presence was a declaration of war written in muscle and strategic positioning. At their center walked a wolf I'd only heard of in whispered legends, sage of the Mistborn pack. Silver-eyed and battle-scarred, she moved with the quiet certainty of someone who'd looked at death and found it wanting. She stopped at the edge of the platform, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the stunned silence with perfect clarity. The old laws demand true trial. This Omega is under our protection. The Nightveil Coalition had arrived, and everything had changed. Chapter 2. The Old Laws. Alpha Ragnar's voice was granite and barely controlled fury. You have no dominion here, Sage. The Black Claw Pack handles its own justice. Leave now, and I'll forget this insult. Sage didn't flinch. Around her, the coalition remained absolutely still, a living wall of intent. Justice, she said, and the word carried layers of meaning that made even Ragnar's betas shift uncomfortably. Is that what you call executing a witness to your son's crime? The Omega lied. Victor pushed forward, his handsome face twisted with indignation that would have been convincing if I couldn't taste the calculation beneath it. I defended myself against an assassin. This worthless. We were there. Sage's words cut through Victor's speech like a blade through silk. Coalition scouts observed your peace negotiation from concealed positions. We watched you approach the Greymane emissary with false courtesy. We saw you drive your claws through his throat while he was still speaking terms. There was no attack. There was only murder. The execution ground erupted into chaos. Ragnar's face went from red to pale. Victor's emotional signature spiked surprise, then rage, then something darker. Fear. The pack wolves who'd been so certain of my guilt now looked at each other with dawning uncertainty. You've been watching us? Ragnar's question was barely above a growl. For months. A different coalition wolf spoke up, an older male with eyes that had seen too much. 47 documented incidents of rank-based corruption across our territories. The Blackclaw pack appeared on our list when a refugee arrived in Mistborn lands with stories of a prince who killed without consequence. We've been monitoring since. Ragnar's tactical mind was working through the implications. I could sense it. 50 coalition wolves in perfect formation against his 100 scattered, confused pack members. On Blackclaw territory, yes, but completely unprepared for this kind of coordinated intervention. If it came to battle, the casualties would be catastrophic regardless of who won. They defend a worthless Omega against the Alpha Sun? Victor's voice climbed toward hysteria. This is madness. He's nothing. His word is. I only want truth, not revenge. The words left my mouth before I'd consciously decided to speak. Everyone turned to stare at the condemned Omega who'd just interrupted the heir to the Alpha's throne. I was still on my knees, chains still cutting into my wrists, but something had shifted inside me. These wolves, strangers from 5 different packs, had risked themselves to stop my execution. The least I could do was be worthy of it. I told Alpha Ragnar what I saw because I thought truth mattered. I continued, my voice steadier than I felt. I still think it matters. Victor murdered an emissary under a peace banner. That's not pack justice. That's not any kind of justice. It's just power protecting itself. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Sage smiled, a small expression that somehow contained both approval and recognition. She knew what it cost an Omega to speak like that in front of his Alpha. Ragnar looked from Victor to me to the coalition surrounding his execution ground. I watched him calculate, watched duty war with love for his son, watched pride collide with pragmatism. Finally, he spoke. 3 days. We'll hold a true trial under coalition oversight. If the Omega's testimony stands, my son will face judgment. If it falls, the coalition withdraws and accepts Blackclaw sovereignty. Agreed, Sage said immediately. Ash comes with us until trial. Protective custody. As coalition wolves moved to remove my chains, I caught Victor's gaze. His emotional signature was pure poison now, humiliation, rage, and something that tasted like a promise. This wasn't over. For him, it had just begun. Chapter 3: The Coalition's Camp. The journey to neutral territory took half a day, and every step carried me further from the only world I'd known. The coalition moved with that same eerie precision through dense forest and over rocky ridges, scouts ranging ahead and behind, a protective formation that never quite felt like captivity despite technically being exactly that. I walked beside Sage, still processing the fact that the legendary alpha of the Mistborn pack was treating me like an equal. She asked my opinion on route choices. She warned me before difficult terrain. She introduced me by name to the coalition members we passed, as if Ash of no lineage was someone worth remembering. The encampment materialized from the forest like it had grown there. Hidden in a natural bowl surrounded by pine and granite, it was temporary but sophisticated organized areas for different packs, a central meeting space around a carefully banked fire, sentries posted at every approach. Wolves of all ranks moved through the space with easy familiarity, and that was what struck me most. Alphas working beside Omegas to prepare food. Betas taking instruction from lower-ranked scouts with specialized knowledge. It was everything Blackclaw wasn't. Sage led me to the central fire where the Coalition Council waited. 5 alphas from 5 packs, but when they looked at me, I didn't see the automatic dismissal I'd lived with my entire life. I saw curiosity, concern, and something that made my throat tight respect. "You're wondering why," Sage said, reading my confusion easily. She settled beside the fire, and the firelight caught the network of scars across her muzzle and throat. Why would alphas risk themselves for an omega? Why does the coalition exist at all? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Because I was you. The words were simple, devastating. 20 years ago, I witnessed my alpha kill a subordinate who'd discovered corruption. I reported it. I was sentenced to execution. Her silver eyes held mine. I was saved by a wolf named Ash, your namesake, that you wouldn't know. He was Omega of the Nightvale Pack, and he founded this coalition because he believed no wolf should die for telling truth. The revelation hit like a physical blow. The coalition hadn't just saved me. They'd been created by someone like me, for someone like me. Ash taught us a principle that became our foundation, Sage continued. Truth without protection is martyrdom. Protection without truth is tyranny. We offer both. We document injustice, we intervene when we must, and we make sure the voices that power tries to silence get heard. Another wolf spoke up, a grizzled beta with kind eyes. 47 cases in 20 years. 23 omegas saved from execution. 16 corrupt alphas removed. 8 packs reformed. We're not revolutionaries. We're just wolves who believe the old laws meant what they said, truth over rank, justice over power. Your gift, Sage said, bringing the focus back to me. Your truth sense. It's not common intuition. It's rare. Maybe 1 in 1,000 wolves can actually taste lies and read emotional signatures the way you do. That gift could have saved your pack from Victor's corruption if anyone had listened. Now it's going to prove what happened. The trial, I said quietly. The trial, she confirmed. 3 days to prepare testimony that will stand against cross-examination, political pressure, and Victor's inevitable attempts to discredit you. Ragnar gave us 3 days. We're going to use every minute. She leaned forward, intense. Ash, this isn't just about you anymore. This is about whether pack law means anything, whether omegas have value beyond submission, whether justice is possible when power is threatened. Are you ready to be the voice that answers those questions? I thought about Victor's claws in the emissary's throat. About my pack's willingness to execute rather than investigate. About the coalition wolves who'd risked everything to stop it. Yes, I said. Teach me how to make them listen. Chapter 4. Training the Witness. Sage proved to be a relentless teacher. We began at dawn the next day, in a clearing away from the main camp, just her and me and the weight of everything riding on my ability to testify effectively. Facts are not enough, she said, circling me like we were sparring. Victor will have facts too, his version, carefully constructed to make him the victim. You need to give them something facts can't refute. You need to make them feel the truth. She had me describe the murder over and over, each time pushing me to articulate not just what I saw, but what I sensed. Victor approached with his shoulders relaxed, voice warm, but I tasted his intent. It was cold, metallic, like blade oil. The emissary's emotional signature was open, hopeful. Then Victor struck, and I felt his satisfaction. Not relief. Not fear transformed. To action. Satisfaction. Pleasure in the kill. Good, Sage said. Now tell me why you're certain it was premeditated. I closed my eyes, remembering. His heartbeat never spiked. Fear or self-defense causes adrenaline, a surge. Victor's emotional signature was steady before, during, and after. He was calm because he'd planned it. This was execution, not defense. A new voice interrupted, young, male, carrying the careful neutrality of someone used to being dismissed. That's exactly the kind of detail that matters. I turned to find an Omega male approaching, smaller than me but carrying himself with quiet confidence. His eyes were sharp behind scholarly focus, and he carried a leather satchel that bulged with papers. Rune, Sage introduced. Coalition Chronicler. He documents every case we investigate. Rune set his satchel down and began pulling out files. Victor's history, he said, spreading them before me. 3 suspicious deaths in 5 years, all ruled accidents or justified challenges. But look at the pattern. I leaned closer, studying the careful notations. A subordinate who'd questioned Victor's judgment fell from a cliff during a routine patrol. A female who'd rejected Victor's advances, mauled by a rogue bear that was never found. A rival to his position as heir, poisoned by spoiled meat that somehow only affected one wolf. He eliminates obstacles, I said slowly, the pattern crystallizing. Anyone who threatens his power or his ego. Methodically. Patiently. And your emissary? Rune asked. Was negotiating terms that would have limited Blackclaw's expansion into Greymane territory. Victor saw peace as weakness. The murder was strategic. Blame it on the emissary being an assassin, justify retaliation, start a war he thought we'd win. My truth sense had shown me Victor's calculation in the moment, but I hadn't understood the full scope until now. We worked through the afternoon, Rune and Sage drilling me on every detail, every emotional nuance, preparing me for the hostile questioning I'd face. Then, as the sun began to set, a neutral wolf arrived at the camp perimeter with a message. The wolf wouldn't enter, wouldn't even speak to anyone but me. I approached alone, and he delivered Victor's words in a flat monotone that suggested he'd been paid well to memorize them exactly. Rescind your testimony. Admit you were mistaken. If you persist, your packmates will suffer. Every Omega in Blackclaw will pay for your pride. Their blood will be on your conscience. The message wasn't sealed with claws, it was sealed with precision. Victor knew exactly where to apply pressure. Omegas in Blackclaw had protected me when they could, shown small kindnesses in a world that offered few. Now I'd bring coalition scrutiny down on the pack, and Victor would make the vulnerable pay. I walked back to the fire where Sage waited. She'd heard. Everyone had heard. "He's right," I said quietly. "If I testify, others will suffer." Sage's silver eyes were hard, but not unkind. "Silence protects only the guilty. Your packmates suffer either way, under Victor's cruelty when he escapes consequences, or under his revenge if you speak truth. The difference is, if you speak, the suffering ends. If you're silent, it continues forever with the coalition's blessing." She leaned closer. "Victor wants you to believe you're responsible for his choices. You're not. He's responsible. And in 3 days, he's going to face that responsibility whether he wants to or not." I looked at the files Rune had compiled, at the pattern of calculated murder, at the evidence of a predator who'd operated without consequence for too long. "Then let's make sure my testimony destroys him," I said. Chapter 5: Gathering the Silent. The Coalition's investigation had been thorough. By the second day, they'd identified 3 other Blackclaw wolves who'd witnessed Victor's crimes, but had been too terrified to speak. Sage assigned me the task of approaching them, and I understood why. An Omega reaching out to the frightened would be less threatening than an Alpha demanding cooperation. Juniper found me first, actually. Mid-ranked female, decent hunter, eyes that had learned to look at the ground. She approached the neutral territory perimeter at dawn and asked specifically for me. When we sat together away from the others, her emotional signature was a storm of conflict, desperation warring with terror. "For years ago," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I saw Victor kill Talon. We were on patrol together. Talon suggested Victor was taking too many risks in the Southern Territories. They argued. Victor waited until we were near the cliff paths, then shoved Talon off. Smiled while he did it. Told me if I spoke, I'd be next, and no one would believe a mid-rank female over the air anyway. I could taste the truth in every word, the bitter flavor of a secret that had been poisoning her for years. You were right not to speak then, I said carefully. But now you're not alone. The Coalition has evidence. They have protection. If you testify, Victor can't touch you. Can't he? Her laugh was broken. The Coalition leaves eventually. We stay in Blackclaw. What happens when Sage and her wolves go home? I had no answer that wasn't a lie, so I told her the only truth I had. Victor wins if we're silent. Completely. Forever. He'll kill again because he'll know he can. More talons. More emissaries. Maybe you, if you ever become inconvenient. I met her eyes. But if we all speak together, if the evidence is undeniable, even Ragnar can't protect him. The corruption ends. That's worth the risk. She agreed, finally, with trembling resolution. Flint was harder. The Elder had seen the emissary murder from a different vantage point. He'd been gathering herbs on the ridge above and witnessed everything. But he had grandchildren in Blackclaw, leverage Victor could exploit. I spent an hour with him, not pushing, just listening to his fear. In the end, it was Rune who convinced him. The chronicler showed Flint the documented cases, the pattern of unpunished violence, and asked a simple question: what world do you want your grandchildren to inherit? Flint agreed to testify. Echo almost broke me. She was younger than me, an Omega who'd learned to make herself invisible the way I had. Victor had assaulted her 2 years ago during a pack gathering, and when she'd tried to report it, She'd been told Omegas didn't accuse heirs of anything. The trauma was written in every line of her body, in the way she couldn't meet my eyes, in the suffocating weight of shame that wasn't hers to carry. "I can't," she said when I explained what we needed. "Everyone will know. They'll say I wanted it, that I'm lying for attention, that..." "They'll say those things whether you speak or not," I interrupted gently. "Silence doesn't protect you from their judgment. It just means the truth never gets heard." I moved closer, careful not to crowd her. "Echo, I know what it costs to speak. They beat me, chained me, sentenced me to die. But I spoke anyway, and because I did, the coalition came. Sage was saved by a wolf who spoke truth when no one believed him. Now she saves others. Your voice matters. Not despite what Victor did to you, but because of it. You're a witness to who he really is." She cried then, and I sat with her while she broke apart and slowly reformed into something harder and braver. When she finally agreed, her voice was steady. "I'll testify. But you have to be there. All of us. Together. Together, I promised." That night, the four of us sat by the coalition fire, me, Juniper, Flint, and Echo. For wolves Victor had tried to silence through violence, intimidation, and shame. Sage and Rune worked with each of us, preparing testimony, building the unshakable case. I realized something as I watched Echo find her courage and Juniper release 4 years of fear. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was becoming something else. An organizer. A voice for those who'd been taught they had none. The trial would determine Victor's fate, but this gathering of the silenced into a chorus that couldn't be ignored, this was already victory. Tomorrow, we returned to Black Claw. Tomorrow, the real test began. Chapter 6. The Poisoning. The evening before the trial, diplomatic protocol demanded a shared meal between Coalition and Black Claw representatives. It was meant to demonstrate civility, to show that justice could be pursued without descending into tribal warfare. The tension in the neutral territory camp was thick enough to taste as wolves from both sides gathered around the ceremonial fire, carefully maintaining the prescribed distances. Every movement watched, every word weighed. Rune sat beside me, his chronicler's satchel never far from reach. He'd been documenting everything, witness statements, historical precedents, the careful construction of our case. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "everything changes. One way or another." I nodded, watching Victor across the fire. The air had come with Ragnar's delegation, radiating confidence that felt like a calculated performance. His emotional signature was complex arrogance layered over anxiety, contempt wrapped around fear. He knew the evidence against him was substantial, but he also knew the power of rank and charm. He was gambling that bloodline would trump truth. The food was served by neutral wolves, tradition dictating that neither side could prepare what the other consumed. Rune took a piece of roasted venison, and I watched him chew, swallow, reach for another piece. Normal. Everything was normal until it wasn't. He made a small sound, almost a question, and his eyes went wide. Then he collapsed, convulsing, foam specking his muzzle. The camp erupted into chaos. Coalition wolves surrounded their fallen chronicler while simultaneously forming defensive positions. Black Claw representatives backed away, some with weapons half drawn, others with hands raised in protestation of innocence. Sage was at Rune's side in seconds, her healer checking his vitals while she surveyed the scene with those silver eyes gone cold and calculating. Poison, the healer confirmed. Wolfsbane extract. Deliberate. The Black Claw delegation brought this. A coalition beta snarled, and I could feel the rage building, the careful diplomacy shattering into the potential for immediate violence. 50 coalition wolves against 20 Black Claw observers, and the math was deadly. Stand down. Sage's command cut through the rising chaos like a blade. She stood, and despite everything, despite the fury I could sense burning beneath her control, her voice remained level. We are not what they are. We prove guilt, not assume it. But the food someone started was served by neutral wolves and eaten by both sides, Sage interrupted. Rune's portion was specifically targeted. That requires access, timing, and knowledge of who would sit where. Her gaze swept the Black Claw delegation, and several wolves couldn't meet her eyes. One of yours delivered this poison. We will discover who and why. Through investigation, not rage. The questioning took an hour. A young Black Claw servant, barely more than a juvenile, finally broke under the weight of Sage's methodical interrogation. Victor had approached him 2 days ago, offered him status and protection in exchange for one simple task: slip the poison into the chronicler's food. The boy had believed it would just make Rune sick, unable to testify. He hadn't understood it could kill. Rune survived, but barely. The healer worked through the night, purging the toxin from his system while the camp maintained a tense vigil. By dawn, he was stable but unconscious. He wouldn't attend the trial. Our carefully documented case had just lost its keeper. The Coalition Council gathered at first light. The debate was fierce and immediate. We have proof of assassination attempt, one alpha argued. We should strike now, remove Victor permanently before he reaches the trial ground. Agreed, another said. He's shown he'll stop at nothing. The trial is a trap. We should act. Others nodded. The mood was shifting toward immediate violence, the kind of justice that came from teeth and claws rather than testimony and judgment. I understood the impulse. Victor had nearly murdered Rune simply for documenting his crimes. What would he do when faced with actual consequences? But if we abandon the trial, if we let rage dictate our response, then everything the coalition stood for became meaningless. I stood. Every eye turned to me, the Omega who'd been days away from execution, now speaking in a council of alphas. My voice was steady despite the fear that made my legs weak. If we abandon law when challenged, we prove Victor right, that power is all that matters. I looked at each council member in turn. He wants us to attack. He wants to turn this into a war where he can claim victim status, where his father can rally Black Claw behind the threat of outside aggression. He wants us to be the monsters he's always claimed we are. Sage watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. But if we proceed with the trial, I continued, if we prove that justice can withstand violence and intimidation, if we show that truth matters even when power tries to destroy it, then we win. Not just this case. We win the larger fight. We prove the coalition's purpose. The silence stretched. Then Sage spoke. Ash is right. The trial proceeds. But we triple the security. Victor and Ragnar want to see if we're committed to law. We'll show them law backed by strength. That's the balance we exist to maintain. The council agreed, though some reluctantly. As wolves dispersed to prepare, Sage pulled me aside. Her expression was serious, and I could taste her concern like copper on the wind. "Victor will stop at nothing," she said quietly. "The courtroom may become a killing ground. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Rune, fighting for his life because he'd documented truth. About Echo's courage and Juniper's trembling testimony. About the coalition itself, founded by an Omega who'd refused to let power silence conscience. "Yes," I said. "Whatever comes, I'm ready." Tomorrow, we would return to Black Claw. Tomorrow, the execution ground where I should have died would become the place where truth either triumphed or was finally buried. Chapter 7. The Trial Ground. The execution ground had been transformed overnight into something between battlefield and temple. Ancient protocols demanded specific arrangements: 6 judges seated in a semicircle, 3 from Coalition and 3 from Black Claw. The testimony stone at center, worn smooth by generations of wolves who'd stood upon it to speak truth or lies. Torches arranged in precise patterns that dated back to the first packs, when justice was administered under starlight and witnessed by the entire community. Every member of Black Claw Pack had gathered. Coalition representatives stood in formation at the perimeter. Neutral witnesses from neighboring territories occupied designated areas, their presence meant to ensure fairness. It should have felt like justice being served. Instead, it felt like the moment before Avalanche, everything precariously balanced, waiting for the wrong word to bring it all crashing down. Victor stood with his father near the judges' seats. The air wore confidence like armor, his posture radiating the easy arrogance of someone who'd never truly faced consequences. His emotional signature had stabilized into something focused and dangerous. He believed his charm and bloodline would prevail. He'd spent his entire life learning how to manipulate social dynamics, how to make people see what he wanted them to see. Ragnar was harder to read. The Alpha's massive frame was rigid with tension, his expression carved from granite. But I could taste the conflict bleeding from him like a wound, love for his son warring with duty to Pack Law, pride colliding with the growing realization that he'd been protecting a predator. The head judge, a grizzled neutral alpha from the Stonepaw Pack, called the assembly to order. His voice carried across the crowd with the weight of tradition. "We gather under the old laws to determine truth in the matter of Victor, heir to Black Claw, accused of murder and conspiracy. Let all present witness that justice here serves no pack, only law." Victor's defense was presented first, as tradition demanded. His advocate, a skilled beta with a silver tongue, painted a compelling picture. The Greymane emissary had been acting suspiciously, asking questions that seemed designed to gather intelligence rather than negotiate peace. When confronted, the emissary had attacked, and Victor had defended himself and pack honor. The Omega witness, Ash, was known to be unstable, prone to paranoid delusions, seeking attention through false accusations. Then Victor himself took the testimony stone. He was magnificent. I had to admit it even as I tasted the lies beneath his words. He described the encounter with carefully measured emotion, the shock of betrayal, the split-second decision to protect himself, the horror of having to kill during what should have been peaceful negotiation. He spoke of his regret, his commitment to honor, his confusion at why an Omega would fabricate such terrible accusations. "I've done nothing but serve this pack," Victor said, his voice breaking perfectly on cue. "I don't understand why the Coalition has chosen to believe delusions over the word of Black Claw's heir. Unless he paused, let the implication hang, unless they seek to undermine our pack's strength by removing our future alpha. The audience murmured. I could feel the sentiment shifting, could taste how effective his performance was. Even some coalition wolves looked uncertain. The cross-examination should have shattered his story. The coalition advocate was skilled, asking pointed questions about the positioning of the body, the lack of defensive wounds on Victor, the convenient absence of other witnesses. But Victor deflected each challenge with rehearsed grace, turning questions back on the questioner, maintaining that perfect balance of wounded innocence and dignified defense. When the first day recessed at dusk, my heart sank. Pack's sentiment clearly favored Victor. The judges' expressions were neutral, but I'd seen enough doubt in their eyes to know our case was weakening. Sage found me in the coalition's temporary camp as night fell. She sat beside me without speaking for a long moment, just letting me process the day's damage. I failed, I said finally. He's going to win. You haven't testified yet. She turned to face me, silver eyes reflecting firelight. Tomorrow, you take the testimony stone. And here's what you need to remember. Don't argue with his lies. Don't try to match his eloquence. Victor is a performer. You can't outperform him. Then what do? You describe the truth so vividly, they cannot deny it. She leaned closer, intense. You have a gift Victor doesn't. You can sense emotional reality beneath surface presentation. Tomorrow, you don't just tell them what happened. You make them feel it. The emissary's terror. Victor's cold calculation. The texture of premeditated murder. You paint truth in colors so real that Victor's pretty lies become transparent. I looked toward Blackclaw territory, toward the trial ground that tomorrow would determine everything. And if that's not enough? Sage's expression hardened. Then we've proven that power matters more than truth, and the coalition's work becomes infinitely harder. But either way, Ash, you will have spoken. You will have stood on that stone and refused to be silent. That matters, regardless of outcome. Tomorrow. Everything came down to tomorrow. Chapter 8. The Testimony. Dawn broke cold and clear over the trial ground. I walked through the assembled pack toward the testimony stone, feeling hundreds of eyes tracking my movement. The Omega who'd been dragged here in chains for execution now approached with coalition escort, protected by the very laws Victor claimed to uphold. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Victor's advocate stood immediately. The defense objects to Omega testimony as inherently unreliable. The accused is of significantly higher rank. The old laws recognize hierarchy. The old laws recognize truth, not rank. Sage's voice cut through the objection with quiet authority. If we dismiss testimony based on status rather than substance, we abandon law entirely. The judges will hear what Ash has to say and determine its value based on evidence, not bloodline. The neutral judges conferred briefly. The head judge nodded. Testimony is permitted. The witness will speak. I stepped onto the stone. It was still stained with my blood from 3 days ago, a reminder of how close I'd come to dying unheard. Now every wolf in Blackclaw territory and beyond was forced to listen. Tell us what you witnessed, the judge said. I took a breath, closed my eyes briefly, and let myself return to that moment. When I spoke, I didn't recite facts. I described reality. I was in the supply alcove off the main negotiation chamber, inventorying winter stores as Omegas do. The emissary had arrived that morning with 2 escorts, carrying formal peace terms from Greymane's Alpha. I heard Victor greet them. His voice was warm, welcoming, but I could taste something wrong in it. Like honey poured over poison. Victor's advocate started to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a gesture. Continue. The emissary's emotional signature was open, hopeful. He wanted peace. I could sense his relief that negotiations were going well. His escorts had been dismissed to the guest quarters, protocol for sensitive discussions. He was alone with Victor, trusting that peace banner meant safety. I opened my eyes, looking directly at Victor. Victor's approach was calculated. Every word carefully chosen to put the emissary at ease, to position himself behind and to the left, the kill angle. His heartbeat never spiked. No adrenaline rush. No fear response. Just cold, focused intent. The emissary was mid-sentence, discussing territorial boundaries when Victor struck. One motion, claws through the throat, severing the major vessels. The emissary's terror hit me like a physical blow. He didn't understand what was happening. There was no attack, no threat, just sudden brutal violence from someone he'd trusted. The crowd was absolutely silent now. I could feel their attention like pressure against my skin. But what confirmed premeditation was Victor's reaction afterward. Not shock. Not horror at having been forced to kill. Satisfaction. I tasted it, the clean, cold satisfaction of a task successfully completed. He wiped his claws on the emissary's fur with the same casual efficiency you'd use cleaning after any routine kill. Then he called for guards, already rehearsing his story about being attacked. Victor's lawyer stood again. Objection. The witness claims to taste emotions. This is fantasy, not testimony. Then let me demonstrate. I turned to face the lawyer directly, opening my truth sense fully. You're afraid right now. Not of being wrong, you know Victor is guilty. You've known since you took this case. What you're afraid of is what happens when this trial ends and you're known as the wolf who defended a murderer. Your emotional signature is bitter, metallic, like old fear that's been carried too long. The lawyer's face went pale. Several wolves in the audience gasped. I described something personal, something true. That's my gift, I said, turning back to the judges. I read emotional reality beneath surface presentation. Victor can lie with his words, but he can't lie with his heart. And his heart sang with pleasure when he murdered an unarmed emissary under a peace banner. The head judge leaned forward. And you're certain, absolutely certain, this was premeditated murder, not defense? Absolutely. I stake my life on it. I paused. I already have. Then I called them forward. But I'm not the only witness. Juniper walked to the stone, trembling but determined. She described Talon's murder 4 years ago. Victor's smile as he pushed his subordinate off the cliff, the years of silence born from terror. Flint took the stone next, his elder's voice steady as he corroborated the emissary's death from his vantage point on the ridge. No attack. Only execution. Then Echo approached. The young Omega shook so hard I thought she might collapse, but when she spoke, her voice carried. 2 years ago, Victor assaulted me during a gathering. When I tried to report it, I was told Omegas don't accuse heirs. That we should be grateful for any attention from higher ranks. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop. I stayed silent because I was taught my word meant nothing. But it does mean something. What he did to me, what he did to the emissary, What he's done to everyone who threatened his power, it all shows the same thing. Victor believes he's above law, above consequence, above basic decency. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern. I watched the judge's expression shift, watched the audience's certainty crumble. Victor's advocate demanded his client be allowed to respond. Victor retook the stone, but the easy confidence had fractured. As he defended himself, something ugly bled through: contempt for lesser wolves who dared challenge him, irritation that rank wasn't being properly respected, barely concealed rage at being questioned by Omegas. "You ask me to apologize for defending my pack," he snarled. "For making hard decisions that weak wolves can't understand? These Omegas accuse me because they want to drag down anyone with real power, real strength." "Real strength," I interrupted, unable to stop myself, "doesn't require murdering unarmed emissaries. It doesn't require assaulting those who can't fight back. What you call strength is just cruelty with a crown." Victor's mask shattered completely. "You dare interrupt me? You're nothing. An Omega who should have died days ago. Your word means." "My word revealed what you truly are," I said quietly. "And now everyone sees it." The audience had gone silent. In trying to defend himself, Victor had shown them exactly what I'd described: the entitled cruelty, the contempt for anyone he deemed beneath him, the belief that power justified any action. He'd proven my testimony true with his own mouth. Chapter 9: Judgment and Voice. The 6 judges withdrew to deliberate as the sun reached its apex. Coalition and Blacklaw wolves maintained their positions in tense silence, waiting for the verdict that would determine not just Victor's fate, but the soul of pack justice itself. I sat with Sage and the other witnesses, too exhausted for fear. Echo leaned against Juniper, both of them drained from having finally spoken. Flint stared at the judge's chamber with an expression of cautious hope. Whatever came next, we'd done what we could. We'd spoken truth clearly enough that even power couldn't quite ignore it. The deliberation took 3 hours. When the judges finally emerged, their expressions were grim. The head judge called for silence and spoke the words that made my heart stop. "In the matter of Victor of Blacklaw, accused of murder and conspiracy, we have reached unanimous verdict." He paused, letting the weight of that word, unanimous, settle over the crowd. "On all charges, guilty." The crowd erupted. Some in celebration, others in shock, still others in anger. But the verdict stood, carved now into pack history and law. The evidence presented by multiple witnesses, corroborated through independent observation and consistent with documented patterns of behavior, leaves no reasonable doubt, the judge continued. Victor of Blacklaw did willfully murder the Greymane emissary under false pretense, did assault and abuse members of his own pack, and did attempt to obstruct justice through intimidation and poison. I watched Ragnar's face crumble. The alpha who'd been so certain of his son's innocence now confronted the undeniable truth. He'd enabled a predator, had chosen legacy over law, and now faced the consequences. The debate over sentencing was fierce. Some coalition members called for execution. Victor was too dangerous to exile, too likely to return with revenge. Others advocated for imprisonment. But it was Sage who proposed the solution that satisfied law if not bloodlust. Exile beyond territorial boundaries. Victor is stripped of name, rank, and pack affiliation. He becomes no wolf, permitted neither in coalition territories nor any land that recognizes pack law. He survives alone or not at all. The judges agreed. Ragnar was given the choice: accept the sentence or fight the coalition for his son's life. I watched him struggle, watched love war with duty. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollowed out. I accept the judgment. I failed as a father by teaching my son that rank excused cruelty. I failed as alpha by protecting him when I should have held him accountable. He looked at me, and I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. An alpha who cannot face truth is no alpha. I request coalition oversight of Blackclaw Pack for the next 5 years to ensure we rebuild correctly. The coalition agreed. As Victor was stripped of his rank markers and prepared for exile, he caught my gaze one final time. "This isn't over, Omega," he snarled. "I'll remember you." "I'm counting on it," I replied quietly. "Because everywhere you go, wolves will know what you are." That's the real sentence. You'll never escape the truth. As coalition guards led Victor toward the territorial boundaries, Sage approached me. Her expression was serious, but her emotional signature carried approval and something that felt like pride. "The coalition has a position for you if you'll take it. Truth Keeper. You'll travel to packs, investigate reports of injustice, organize the silenced, prepare testimony. You'll be the voice for wolves who've been taught they have none." I looked at the trial ground, at the witnesses who'd found courage, at the pack that had just chosen justice over comfortable corruption. I thought about the coalition's founder, the Omega named Ash, who'd created this possibility of protected truth-telling. "I'm not done speaking," I said. "I accept." Over the following days, transformation rippled through Blackclaw. Ragnar stepped down as alpha, and for the first time in pack history, a leader was elected by full vote rather than bloodline. The execution ground was renamed the Trial Ground of Truth, sanctified as a reminder that justice requires witnesses willing to speak and communities willing to listen. Other packs began requesting coalition oversight. The trial had proven something powerful, that truth could stand against rank, that the vulnerable could challenge the powerful, that justice wasn't just possible but enforceable when the committed stood together. A week after Victor's exile, Sage brought me to the newly sanctified trial ground at dawn. She stood where the judges had sat and gestured for me to join her. "The coalition's founder, the first Ash, was my mentor," she said quietly. "He saved me from execution, taught me that Omega doesn't mean powerless, founded this organization to prevent what had nearly happened to both of us. He died 5 years ago, protecting a young wolf from an abusive alpha. His last words were, 'The voice continues.'" She met my eyes. "You carry his name. You've lived his purpose. And now you'll extend his legacy." I stood on the stone where I'd nearly died, where I'd testified, where truth had finally been heard. Around me, coalition wolves gathered, all 50 of them, forming that same protective formation they'd arrived in, but now it felt different. Not like a rescue, but like a recognition. I was one of them now. I addressed the assembled wolves, my voice carrying across the trial ground with new confidence. "I am one voice of many. Every Omega, every silenced wolf, every member of any pack who's been taught their truth doesn't matter. They carry knowledge that power fears. I will travel to them. I will help them organize. I will make sure those truths are heard." The coalition howled, not a challenge or a claim of dominance, but something older and more profound. A howl of solidarity, of purpose affirmed, of justice acknowledged. As the sound echoed across the territories, I understood fully what had happened. They dragged me to this ground to silence truth, to make an example of what happened to Omegas who spoke against power. Instead, they'd created the voice they feared most. And that voice would not be silenced again.